The storm hit like a fist, tearing across the Montana plains with a howl that shook the walls of my ranch house. Rain lashed the windows, and lightning cracked the sky open, illuminating the endless stretch of my land. Empty, save for the ghosts of my past. I was alone, as always, until a shadow stumbled through the deluge. A stranger who would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. My name is Ethan Carver, 32, a rancher born and bred on this patch of earth outside Billings. I've spent my life wrestling with the land, my calloused hands proof of years spent fixing fences, herding cattle, and burying dreams under the weight of duty. My parents passed when I was 20, leaving me this ranch and a heart too stubborn to let anyone in. The townsfolk call me dependable, solitary, maybe even cold. I never corrected them. Solitude was my armor, and I wore it well. That night, the storm was biblical. The power flickered, and I was nursing a whiskey by the fire when a knock rattled the door. It wasn't the polite tap of a neighbor, but a desperate pounding, like someone fighting for their life. I grabbed my shotgun, instincts honed by years of living where coyotes and thieves don't knock. Through the peephole, I saw him. A man, drenched, shivering, his face half hidden under a hood. "Help!" he gasped when I cracked the door, his voice barely audible over the wind. "My car broke down, please." His eyes, wide and dark, locked onto mine. Something in them, fear, maybe, or something deeper, made me lower the gun. Against every rule I'd set for myself, I let him in. His name was Caleb Nguyen, 28, a wanderer with no clear destination. He peeled off his soaked jacket, revealing a lean frame and sharp cheekbones that caught the firelight. His black hair clung to his forehead, and his hands trembled as he warmed them by the hearth. He was from Seattle, he said, a photographer chasing stories across the country. His car had skidded off the road a mile back, and he'd walked through the storm to find shelter. I didn't ask why he was out here, in the middle of nowhere. I didn't trust myself to care. I gave him dry clothes, my old flannel and jeans, too big for his slider build, and a mug of coffee. He thanked me, his voice soft but steady, like he'd seen worse than a storm. We sat in silence, the fire crackling between us. Outside, the world roared, but in here, it was just us, two strangers bound by circumstance. I caught myself staring at him too long, at the way his fingers curled around the mug, at the curve of his lips when he offered a faint smile. My chest tightened, and I looked away, blaming the whiskey. "You live out here alone?" Caleb asked, breaking the quiet. His tone wasn't prying, just curious, but it hit like a dart. "Yeah," I said, gruffer than I meant. "Always have." He nodded like he understood something I hadn't said. "Must get lonely." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. Instead, I offered him the guest room and told him to stay until the storm passed. He thanked me again, his eyes lingering on mine, and I felt a pull I couldn't name. As I lay in bed that night, the storm still raging, I couldn't shake the thought of him down the hall. A stranger? Yes, but one who'd already cracked the surface of my carefully guarded world. The next morning, the storm had eased, but the roads were a mess. Caleb's car was stuck in a ditch, and the tow truck wouldn't come until the mud dried. He'd be here at least a day, maybe two. I told myself it was no trouble. I had enough food, enough space. But the truth was, his presence unsettled me. He moved through my house with an ease that felt foreign, like he belonged in a way I didn't expect. He offered to help with chores, and I let him, mostly to keep my mind off the way his laugh echoed in the barn. We mended a fence together, his hands clumsy but willing, and he asked questions about the ranch, about me. I answered in short bursts, deflecting, but he didn't push. Instead, he told me about his life, growing up in a tight-knit Vietnamese family, coming out at 19, the way the world both opened and closed doors after that. His honesty was raw, unguarded, and it stirred something in me I'd buried long ago. By afternoon, we were sitting on the porch, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. He pulled out his camera, a battered Nikon, and started snapping photos of the ranch, the horizon, the cattle, the way the light hit the barn. "You've got something special here," he said, squinting through the lens. "It's raw, real." I shrugged, but his words stuck. No one had called my life special before. It was just mine. Yet watching him, I felt a flicker of pride, maybe something more. That night, over a dinner of steak and potatoes, he told me about the places he'd been: New Orleans, Chicago, small towns no one remembers. His stories were alive, painted with color and feeling, and I found myself leaning in, hungry for more. When he asked about me, I froze. I wasn't used to being seen, but his eyes, steady and kind, coaxed out pieces of my story. My parents' accident, the years of keeping the ranch alive, the way I'd shut out the world to survive. He listened, really listened, and for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. As the fire died down, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. It was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I pulled back, heart pounding, and muttered something about checking the generator. Outside, in the cold, I cursed myself. I wasn't this man. A rancher didn't have room for feelings like these. But when I came back inside, Caleb was still there, waiting, his gaze soft but unflinching. And I knew, deep down, that something had shifted. The next day, Caleb insisted on helping with the cattle. He was no rancher, that was clear. His boots slipped in the mud, and he flinched when a steer snorted too close, but his determination was stubborn, almost endearing. I caught myself smiling as he tried to mimic my movements, his city-bred hands fumbling with the rope. "You're not half bad," I said, tossing him a grin. He laughed, and the sound warmed me more than the sun breaking through the clouds. We worked side by side, the rhythm of the ranch pulling us into a quiet harmony. He asked more questions about the land, the animals, the life I'd built. I answered this time, letting him in bit by bit. I told him about the oak tree out back, where my parents used to sit, and how I'd carved their initials into it after they died. He listened, his eyes tracing my face like he was memorizing it. That afternoon, he asked to see the tree. We walked out together, the grass still damp underfoot. The oak stood tall, its branches sprawling against the sky. Caleb ran his fingers over the carved initials, his touch gentle, reverent. "This place is full of stories," he said softly, "yours included." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Instead, I watched him take photos, his focus intense, like he was capturing more than just the tree. When he turned the camera on me, I protested, but he just smiled. "You're part of this place, Ethan. Let me see you." My throat tightened. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I was worth seeing. I stood there, awkward under his lens, but his quiet encouragement made me stay. Later, when he showed me the photo, a grainy shot of me against the oak, my face softened by the light, I barely recognized myself. Not the stoic rancher, but a man with something to feel. That night, we sat by the fire again, closer this time. He told me about his ex, a man who'd broken his heart in Seattle, and how he'd hit the road to outrun the pain. His voice cracked when he spoke of it, and I wanted to reach for him, to tell him he wasn't alone. But I couldn't. Instead, I shared something I hadn't told anyone. How I'd loved someone once, a boy in high school, but buried it when my parents died. The ranch became my life, and love became a luxury I couldn't afford. Caleb's hand found mine, deliberate this time. His fingers were warm, steady, and I didn't pull away. "You don't have to be alone, Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." My heart hammered, torn between fear and want. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of my life, The ranch, the past, the expectations felt like chains. Yet in that moment, with his hand in mine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The tow truck came the next morning, earlier than expected. Caleb's car was hauled out of the ditch, and the driver said the roads were clear enough for him to leave. I stood on the porch, watching as Caleb packed his things, my stomach twisting. He'd only been here 2 days, but it felt like a lifetime. I didn't want him to go, but I didn't know how to ask him to stay. He lingered by the door, his bag slung over his shoulder. "Thanks for everything, Ethan," he said, his voice heavy. "I mean it." I nodded, words caught in my throat. He stepped closer, and before I could think, he hugged me. A quick, fierce embrace that left me breathless. Then he was gone, his car disappearing down the dirt road. The ranch felt emptier than ever, the silence deafening. For days, I threw myself into work, trying to outrun the ache. But Caleb was everywhere. In the barn where we'd laughed, by the oak where he'd taken my picture. I found one of his photos tucked in the guest room, a shot of the ranch at sunrise, with a note scrawled on the back, "For Ethan, who makes this place home." I held it too long, my fingers tracing his handwriting. A week later, I drove into town for supplies and saw a flyer for an art exhibit in Billings. Caleb's name was on it. He'd mentioned a gallery contact, but I hadn't realized he was showing his work so soon. I told myself I wouldn't go, that it was better to let him fade. But that night, I found myself in my truck, driving to the city, my heart pounding like I was 16 again. The gallery was small, crowded with people sipping wine and murmuring about art. Caleb's photos lined the walls, vivid shots of deserts, cities, faces. And there, in the corner, was my ranch, my oak tree, me. The photo from that day, framed and lit with a title, "A Man and His Roots." I stood frozen, my chest tight, as Caleb's voice came from behind me. "You came," he said, soft but surprised. He looked different in the city lights, polished, confident, but his eyes were the same, warm and searching. "I had to," I admitted, my voice rough. I didn't want you to leave." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "I didn't want to leave either," he said. "But I didn't think you'd want me to stay." We stood there, the crowd fading away, and I felt the weight of every choice I'd ever made. For the first time, I wanted to choose something for myself. "Come back," I said, the words spilling out. "Stay." Caleb came back to the ranch that night. We didn't talk much on the drive, but the silence was different now, charged, alive. When we reached the house, he set his bag down and looked at me, his eyes asking a question I wasn't sure I could answer. But I wanted to try. We fell into a rhythm, tentative at first. He stayed in the guest room, but we spent our days together, working the ranch, sharing meals, talking late into the night. He taught me how to see the beauty in the mundane, capturing moments I'd never noticed. The way the light hit the hay bales, the curve of a calf's ear. I taught him how to ride a horse, laughing when he nearly fell off, his arms wrapping around me for balance. The townsfolk started to notice. Billings is small and gossip travels fast. I saw the looks at the feed store, heard the whispers at the diner. Ethan Carver, the loner, had someone living with him. A man, no less. I told myself I didn't care, but the weight of their judgment pressed on me. I'd spent my life fitting in, being what they expected. Caleb was a risk I wasn't sure I could take. One night, after a long day, we sat under the oak tree, a blanket spread beneath us. The stars were bright, the air cool. Caleb leaned against me, his shoulder warm against mine, and told me about his dreams. Traveling the world, telling stories through his lens. I wanted to be part of those dreams, but fear clawed at me. What if I wasn't enough? What if I couldn't be the man he needed? "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely audible. This us it's new. And the town. Forget the town, he said, turning to face me. This is about you and me. No one else. He kissed me then, soft and certain, and the world fell away. It was just us under the stars, and for the first time I let myself believe this could be real. But the next morning, a letter arrived from the bank. The ranch was in trouble. Debts my parents had left, compounded by a bad season. If I didn't find a way to pay, I could lose everything. The ranch, my home, the life I'd built. It was all at risk, and with it, the fragile hope of a future with Caleb. The news about the ranch hit like a second storm. I spent days crunching numbers, calling banks, begging for time. Caleb stayed by my side, helping where he could, but I pushed him away, my fear turning into distance. I couldn't lose the ranch, it was all I had, all I was, or so I thought. One evening, Caleb found me in the barn, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. "Ethan," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you don't have to do this alone." I shook my head, anger flaring. "You don't get it. This place is my life. If I lose it, I lose everything." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You're more than this ranch. And you have me." His words broke something in me. I let him pull me into his arms, and for the first time, I let myself lean on someone else. We talked all night, not just about the ranch but about us, what we wanted, what we could be. Caleb had an idea. Sell some of his photos, use the money to help with the debt. I resisted at first. Pride is a stubborn thing, but he insisted, and I saw the love in his eyes, the kind that doesn't back down. We worked together, turning the ranch into a gallery of sorts. Caleb's photos drew a crowd, locals, tourists, even collectors from Billings. The money wasn't enough to save the ranch outright, but it bought us time. More than that, it showed me what we could build together. The townsfolk still whispered, but some started to see me differently. Not just the loner, but a man with a partner, a purpose. One night, under the oak tree, I carved our initials next to my parents. Caleb watched, his hand on my shoulder, and I knew this was my home. Not just the ranch, but him. The storm that brought him here had changed everything, showing me that love wasn't a luxury but a necessity. The ranch was still at risk, but for the first time I wasn't fighting alone. Caleb had come as a stranger, but he'd become my reason to keep going, to build a life worth living, no matter what came next.